I was practicing the reflections that I had written out a couple of nights ago, and when I kept my timer on, I realized that I was falling a little short of my allotted time. And then I talked to my friend Beverly, whom many of you know, and I was telling her of my dilemma, that it was a little short. And her wise counsel was, nobody has ever gotten upset over a service that runs too short. It is when they run too long that people get upset. So here goes. When Carol Kappa contacted me a few months ago and asked if I would like to do the reflections on this particular Sunday, I thought about it for a day or two and decided I could do that. Tomorrow is my husband of 50 years' birthday. He would be 77, as I will be in November. My gosh, that is over 3/4 of a century old. I know. So I thought, well, doing a reflection might be a nice tribute to his birthday. Then I began to reflect on the past 76 years and wondered how I ended up in so many places where I have lived. As a young girl growing up in a small town in Illinois, and I do mean small, 4,000 people then, 4,000 people now. Hasn't changed. I would never have dreamed that I would have lived in Alaska for 2 years, in Northwest Mississippi during the 70s for 7 years. Quite a cultural shock, but those are stories for another time. And ending up in Texas, the state to a gal who grew up with Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and all the westerns of the 50s, was glamour personified, Texas. Even if I was in my 40s when we moved here, I just didn't know how darn hot it would be. Although Mississippi was not much better in the summer, to be accurate, at least it cools down here at night. In Mississippi, it felt like a sauna even in the middle of the night. The temperature may vary by 3 degrees. But I digress, as I can so easily do. I began to contemplate the meaning of life. And I have come to the conclusion that in many ways, life is like a pinball machine. Another favorite activity of my childhood before the days of computer games, where you would put your quarter in a machine, and as long as you manned those flippers on the side, you would able to keep the steel ball from rolling all the way down, hitting lights along the path to earn points. And you were in charge. And we humans are those little steel balls, the pinballs. There are so many things in life we really are not in charge of. So many things that just happen. Of course, we have choices, but even the choices that come up were not necessarily of our making. Well, faced with this topic, and knowing that my own personal ramblings would probably not hold your interest for long, I turned to that wealth of knowledge, the internet. I Googled, a new verb in our language, the meaning of life, and up popped a plethora of writings from all sources. After perusing several, I hit upon an article I really liked by this writer. I'm going to really butcher his name, Aljosha Drezorner. Aljosha Drezorner is a doctoral candidate at the University of Frankfurt in psychology. His research looks at self-compassion and leadership. He also writes fiction for children and youth. I read this article from the Daily Good News That Inspires website. This is a website I subscribe to and get a daily email from. The Daily Good News was started in 1998 by one college student writing positive thoughts to his friends, and now is a website run by volunteers concentrated on good news, inspirational thoughts, writings from sources all over the world. Their philosophy is, be the change you wish to see in the world. In using a summary of A.D.'s writings, and I'm going to refer to him as A.D. from now on, you know who I'm talking about, I would like to give you some insight to the results he developed after performing a social experience. A.D. asked everyone, family members, strangers, etc., what do you think is the meaning of life? Then he compiled his findings into a list. Love was the number one answer. being there with those they love. AD believes that love is physically visible on those kinds of people's faces. It shows in their eyes, their brows, their smiles. Now, a little side, these are my words. You may have noticed that in making eye contact and smiling at someone, they cannot help but smile back. One of my daughters happens to be a bit of a cynic and is always telling me that I should not make eye contact with everyone I pass. But this someone might take that as a signal for further contact. But it is a habit instilled in me, oh yea, these many years, so I am probably going to continue to do so. My smile be the only smile that person has received all day. AD concludes that love should be like confetti. It's not something that should be saved for important people or rare events, but rather be spread around to those who surround you. I was going to get some confetti and toss it out for a special effect, but I thought perhaps Jean would not appreciate that. So, AD's second answer is, I am here for a purpose, related to achieving something, to create something that people will remember. AD says that, although quite a few people mentioned work as their source of meaning, not one of them talked about money, prestige, or power, unlike someone we know in higher places. All of them talked about helping others. People can find meaning by following some cause, like fighting for human rights or researching vaccines for some rare disease. Meaning, in this sense, is always transcendent. It's about more than just us. Back to my cynical daughter. For all her cynicisms, she unconsciously realizes this meaning in many ways. She is a very caring person and does many things to help others. I believe that the giving of oneself is the number one goal in this search for meaning. But, now here's the cynic in me. One has to be cautious and not overgive. This is also coming from my wisdom of years. It is easy for caretakers of the world to overextend themselves. And by doing that, burnout is inevitable. One cannot continue to help the world if one does not also take care of oneself. It is okay to say, no, not this time. And I see a lot of caretakers out there that need to heed my words. His third point, meaning in suffering with the right attitude. AD's third answer to the search. Humans have an incredible ability. We are the only species who can choose their attitude towards involuntary suffering. We have observed or read about brave people who have transformed great trials into personal achievement and growth. We hear about deep humanity in the midst of suffering. AD also says it is important to note that by no means is great suffering necessary to find meaning. It is our interpretation of trials and pain that can make the life meaningful as well. We can see a chance where others see only obstacles. We can see positive in the negative. One time, many years ago, cynical daughter, who enjoys writing and at one time aspired to be an author, lamented that she could never write the next great American novel because, woe is she. Her life has been too good. She has never had to suffer. All great authors and artists have suffered. I had to laugh and I had to apologize by saying I was so sorry that her dad and I had given her such a good life. Of course, she was being dramatic at that age, and as she later learned as an adulthood approached, we all suffer in one way or another. It is how we handle these disappointments or hurts, whether they be big or small, which sets us apart. And that is a choice one makes. Along with that same note, I want to relate a little truism I heard a couple of weeks ago at my Weight Watchers meeting. This lady said, ask yourself, did you really have a bad day? Or did you take a bad 10 minutes and blow it into a bad day? Your choice. I kind of like that. A.D.'s fourth response from his collection of interviews is, and this is kind of my favorite, I think, life is meaningless. But would that be so bad? A.D. says, in the grand scheme of things, our individual lives matter very little. Most of us will never become leading politicians, world-class athletes, or famous artists. It is highly unlikely that our lives are the source of a major change in the world. Our existence will not be noted in history books. This thought can be a little worrying. But if our lives matter so little, why bother? I'll tell you a little story about, I was trying to explain to a friend of a friend about Unitarianism and the fact that I did not believe in heaven or hell or any of that stuff, and that many UUs felt the same way. His response was, well, if there's no heaven or hell, why would anyone behave? If you have no fear, why not lead a wild, uncaring life? I was really taken aback by this because I had not thought about it that way. But then I did come up with how good it felt to be helpful, that being considerate of others was a warm fuzzy. Compassion for others has nothing to do with reward. And then I thought to myself, you greedy old blankety blank, if you really believe in this God of your destiny, don't you think he knows what you're thinking? That your good behavior is just for the reward? So chances are you are hell-bound anyway. But I didn't say it out loud. Back to A.D. From an even grander perspective, almost nothing that humans do contributes much to the shape of the universe. In the timeline of billions of years, humanity is but a hiccup of activity. Even if we stopped existing, the universe would really not care. Many great stories have illustrated this conflict in our finite times on earth versus the concept of infinity. There are two ways to think about this realization. One is to fall in despair because our sense of self-importance is threatened. The other is to acknowledge our smallness. If we really have no major influence on the universe, then we might as well enjoy life to the fullest while we were here. It can also create a major sense of humility because a lack of control can finally be accepted. We can just choose to go with the flow of life. A.D. further notes that the realization of smallness is the solution to conflict between a search for meaning and the knowledge of cosmic insignificance. It frees us to enjoy the moment. Living becomes meaningful through the experience of little things: dancing, listening to music, reading a book, helping others, seeing the first rays of sunshine after a long winter, or in our case here in Texas, a nice summer rain. You can choose to see meaning in every experience life provides. A.D.'s final words on the subject of what is the meaning of life are, and there you have them, 4 sources of meaning: love, work, experience, and our stance toward the unavoidable for suffering. Every story he has collected resonates with all of these. For those of us who have found meaning in life, it is often a combination of these 4. And for those who haven't found it, there is hope, because as humans we are art projects, beautiful and unfinished. Man's search for meaning is perhaps the most fundamental search on the road to self-discovery. And in the end, every last one of us has to find his own answer. In conclusion, I want to do a little experiment of my own. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes here in a minute. Now, I used to do something not like this, but with my students, had them close their eyes. And I told them, I'm going to keep my eyes open, so don't worry. I'm not going to lay by get you. Okay? I want you to close your eyes now and think back to the very first memory you have Not the ones you think you remember because of the stories you have heard, but the really first memory. Keeping your eyes closed, briefly move through your life and try to remember those times when you were the pinball in some of your experiences where you had no control. Think about the choices that you were able to make and those that were completely out of your hands. Contemplate how these experiences have formed you and your definition of the meaning of life. I'm not going to ask you to share. This is a personal thing for you to think about and contemplate. We'll only do it for another minute or two because I know you don't want to sit here all day with your eyes closed. Okay, if you would now open your eyes. And I told you it would be short. We are going to now have our last song.